I'd like to begin discussing the history of chamber music, not only because it has a rich and fantastic repertoire, but also because it's uniquely influenced by society and culture, social status, class, and the state of the economy. But before I go ahead with this, I need to first define the term itself, because it's a particularly slippery one depending on what time period you're referring to. Now, if I'm invited to a chamber music concert in today's times, I would expect to go to something that looks pretty similar to this picture. There'd be a small ensemble on stage, made up of instrumentalists as opposed to a singer or a large orchestra. It'd be in some sort of a formal concert hall, and it'd be performed by professionals. Now, this is a fairly simplistic version, and if that's all there is to it, it'd be pretty uninteresting. But for now, I want to point out that this basic version of what chamber music is wasn't actually clarified until the 19th century. I'm going to call this the modern version. But written chamber music has been around since the early 16th century, and we know that there was plenty of instrumental music going on well before then through pictures and other sources. For example, this trio of young ladies shows one playing a lute and another playing a flute, and they're accompanying this lady who appears to be singing in the background. These gentlemen are playing together, so they do constitute an ensemble. I have no idea what this lad is trying to do, but nonetheless they are an ensemble. So how does this affect how we define chamber music, and what sort of things affected its change towards our modern version? Well, prior to the mid-19th century, if I got an invitation to hear chamber music, I would be least likely to think of the specific instruments I was going to hear or the exact size of the ensemble, but instead would be thinking about what room it was going to be in and what purpose the evening was going to serve. An example of this would be in medieval Germany, where small groups of ensembles made up of brass instruments performed fanfares to let the townspeople know about certain events or to warn of an approaching enemy, for example. So the function here was a service function, and the location was generally outdoors. In this picture, we can see a small family in what appears to be a private home. So the location is a private home, and they appear to be enjoying chamber music simply for its entertainment. This larger picture shows what appears to be a lavish dinner party. We have our guests dressed up in all of their finery. We're in a very luxurious looking room with a high ceiling, gilt-framed pictures, a heavy drape. There are no musicians in this room. However, I would expect to find musicians sitting behind this curtain or perhaps sitting in a small group in the room next door, and they would be instructed to perform soft, easy music to set the mood and the tone of the evening, and of course to show off their host's wealth and ability to provide such extravagance for a simple dinner party. So the function here is to set the mood, and the location is, well, anywhere where dinner is being served. So in terms of location, we could expect to find chamber music being performed in outdoor settings as accompaniment to things like a garden party. More likely, though, we would expect chamber music to be played in a small room located inside. That small room was often referred to as a chamber. The chamber was one of the most important public rooms in a home, and it was usually used to greet visitors and to show off both wealth and status. The term chamber music itself was first used in the late 16th century. So places where we can find chambers would be, of course, private homes, usually of the wealthy or aristocracy, in royal courts, and if it weren't either of these locations, then we would most likely find chamber music being performed in the church. In terms of functions, if it wasn't serving an entertainment purpose, it was most likely serving a service purpose, such as the role that it would play in church. So how does this compare and develop into our modern definition? Well, today, we're not so concerned with the location, whether it's in a church, home, or the largest of concert halls. But we are concerned that the group performing will give us a sense of the intimacy created in those older and smaller locations. So the group really has to work hard to create at least an illusion of intimacy, especially when they're playing in our very large modern concert halls. As far as the modern purpose is concerned, certainly we want to be entertained, but we do expect something more than just background music that was quite often played by amateurs prior to the 19th century. By the time of Beethoven, at the beginning of the 19th century, scores began to become too difficult for amateurs to attempt, and a lot more value was being placed on each individual piece. Consequently, today, we expect chamber music to have a certain seriousness of intention, and that the players themselves be at the highest virtuosic levels. But overall, when we go to a chamber music concert today, our expectations are focused towards the scoring, that there will most likely be a specific type of instrumental group, such as a string quartet or a piano trio, as opposed to before the 19th century when these types of groups weren't yet defined. And we assume that the group will be between 2 to 8 players. But more importantly, and I haven't mentioned this before, the reason why a chamber group is usually limited to about 8 players is because each part should assert an individual identity. And this is key in the difference between chamber music and orchestral music, where many of the instruments are simply accompanying the main melodies. So, in order for the music to be really great, each instrument must have an equal share of the conversation, so that the result is that for the audience, they become privy to an intimate conversation that is quite often intense, compelling, and invigorating. In the next video, I will get on with the history.